Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start on this. I put some stuff up here just for y'all to kind of briefly read over and for us to go over, but before we start, I want to tell y'all, I know this is a lot of big words and it can kind of be confusing at first, but once you do a few of them, it gets a lot more simple, so don't freak out just from reading this. So what we're talking about today for the science test is genetics and Punnett squares. And the basic gist of it is that offspring get two alleles from each of their parents, and what those are determine what kind of features they have. Dominant alleles are shown with capital letters when we're doing Punnett squares and working with genetics, and recessive alleles are shown with lowercase letters. And dominant just means that if you have one of those alleles, you will have that feature because it overrides the recessive alleles. So for instance, if brown eyes were dominant to blue eyes, then you could represent brown eyes with a big B, the brown allele with a big B, and a blue allele with a little b. The letter doesn't matter, so it could be big X and little x or big E and little e. Just remember, what's important to remember is that the big means dominant and the little means recessive. So if a parent has two alleles, so for our example that I just gave with the eyes and using the B, the parent could give two big Bs. What that would mean is that they are giving two dominant alleles, and we call that, when they give two dominant alleles, we call it homozygous dominant, because homo means same, homozygous would just mean the same alleles. They could also give little b, they could give two recessive alleles. That would be called homozygous, again, same, recessive, homozygous recessive. They're the same and they're both recessive. The final option a parent could give would be one dominant and one recessive, or big B, little b. And we just call that heterozygous because hetero means different. So that is just a very beginning introduction. And I'm taping this and I'll send it to y'all if you need it, if you want to go back and write it. But we're about to do a worksheet where you kind of write this stuff in. So I'm going to come over here and share a worksheet. And I have copies of this in the classroom that I can give y'all tomorrow if you want one. So again, I'm going to fill this in so it's going to kind of go with what I just had typed anyway. So let me get a smaller font so it actually fits. So homozygous just means the same alleles. So either and I'm just going to use B's in this just to keep it the same, okay? So homozygous would either be big B, little bit, big B, or little b, little b. I know you have, Brandon, but you said you were still struggling with it. So don't look at the old worksheet. Let's just do this one, okay? So I pretty much did put this in my own words. I don't know, y'all can kind of figure out a way to remember it on your own, but it basically just means homozygous just means you have the same alleles. You're either two big B's or either two dominants or two recessives. Heterozygous means you have different alleles. So if one of your parents is heterozygous, it is definitely going to be one big letter and one little letter, okay? So these things up here, the big B, little b's, big big B, little b. Those are what we call the genotypes. And I don't have a good definition for that. I don't think that matters so much as that you know that's what that's referring to. So that is your genotype. When they say genotype, it's referring to just those letters, those alleles. The phenotype is the physical trait that genotype produces. So the physical trait, the genotype produces. So again, back to our example we were using with the eyes. If you had big B, or little b, or big B, little b. If those are our three options, and if brown eyes are dominant, meaning that big B represents brown eyes, then big B would produce brown eyes. Little b, because little b represented blue eyes, would represent blue eyes. Okay, those are kind of obvious. If you have two big B's and big B represents brown eyes, you're going to have brown eyes. If you have two little b's and little b represents blue eyes, you're going to have blue eyes. What about big B, little b? Would it be brown eyes or blue eyes? What do y'all think? Just based on it, right? It would be brown eyes because the big B represents brown, the little b represents blue, and brown, the big B, is dominant to blue. That's what dominant means. The dominant trait, oops, and I'm going to type that under dominant. It's going to be the letter or the trait represented by the big letter. And it will dominate over any recessive or little letter. And this is totally in my words. I don't know a better way to say it. Dominant is the trait represented by the big letter, and it will dominate over any recessive alleles. The recessive gene is the trait represented by the little letter. Trait represented by the little letter. And it will only present if both alleles are recessive. Or little letters. So far, it is just the basic terminology of this makes sense to y'all. Just how it works, that each parent gets two alleles. If it's a dominant trait they have, it's represented as a big letter. Little letters are recessive. And what dominant and recessive mean? That dominant means it overrides the recessive. Okay, so we're going to do a couple problems here. So in rabbits, black fur is dominant over white fur. So they're wanting us to do a key, which means we're going to do a capital letter and a big letter. So if black fur is dominant over white fur, I'm going to make big F black and little f is going to be white. And again, you could use any, let me make this a different color so it kind of stands out. You could use any letters for this. The important thing is that you make the dominant trait a capital letter. Does that make sense to y'all? Okay. So big F is black, little f is white. That's what we got from this first sentence. They say show a cross of a heterozygous black male. Remember, heterozygous meant they were different, right? So that means we've got a big F, little f. So male is big F, little f. And the female, it says, is a homozygous white female. So what do you think she's going to be? Homozygous means same. So is she going to be big F, or little f, if she is white? What do y'all think? Or are you unsure? If you're unsure, that's fine too. Yep, she's going to be little f. And the reason for that, if anyone is confused on that, our male was big F, little f because he was heterozygous, and heterozygous meant different alleles, one big, one little, one dominant, one recessive. The female is homozygous, which means they're the same. And since she is white, if you look here, little f represented white, so it has to be little f. Okay? So that brings us to our Punnett square. We now know we have a male that's big F, little f, and a female that's little f. So we're going to fill this in over here. Our male is big F, little f, and our female is little f, little f. This is how you do a Punnett square. You put one parent on the top, one parent on the side. Dad was big F, little f. Get my pointer. Dad was big F, little f. Mom was little f. Then you like cross them, like see how that block is the big F and the little f? So I'm going to fill this in based on that. We've got, in this block, it would be big F, little f. In this second block, we've got little f. And then if you come down to this one, we've got another big F, little f, and little f. So how I filled that in, I need to know, does this make sense to y'all? This right here, where I filled it in the center, okay? So those are the possible offsprings this mom and dad could have. And since there are 4 blocks, what do you think each one of those blocks represents percentage-wise? Yep, each one would represent 25%. Since there are 2 that have a big F in them, big F, little f is going to produce what? It's going to put 50%. And what is the big F, little f going to produce? A black fur or white fur? Yep, big F, little f. Hold on, I'm trying to get this to right. Big F, little f is going to produce black fur, and that would be 50% of those. And you've got little f, which is also 50% because there's 2 blocks. That's going to be white fur. Does that make sense? Brandon, does it make sense to you as well so far what I've done here? Can you hear me, Brandon? little b, if you have little b, or in this case, little f, it has to be white fur because there's no dominant trait in it. So for, I'm actually going to type something in red here. So for this section, this block, it has to be black fur because you have a dominant allele. For this one, it has to be white fur because there's no dominant allele. There's just two recessives. For this one, it has to be black. Oops. And for this one, white. So see where I wrote in orange under what each of those would produce? So this offspring would definitely have black fur because that big F overrides anything else. Doesn't matter that there's a little f. So like I said, if you've got too big, it's going to produce the dominant trait. If you've got too little, it's going to produce the recessive trait. And if you have one of each, it's going to produce the dominant trait. That big letter will override every time. Okay, so let's try another one. We've got down here, tall is dominant over short peas. So I'm going to make big T be tall and little t be short. Again, letter doesn't matter, but for us, big T is tall, little t is short. And they're telling us that our parents, we have a homozygous short plant. What does homozygous mean? Means they're the same, and since it's short, that means it's recessive, right? So homozygous recessive. So that would be one parent is TT. And then it's crossed with a homozygous tall plant. What does homozygous tall mean? What are the two letters going to be? Homozygous is same. Yep, it's going to be big T, big T. So they were both homozygous short, which meant little t, homozygous tall, which meant big T, big T. So to fill out our thing, we just go up here and we do one parent is big T, and come over here to the side and we do little t. And remember, then we just kind of like cross it. You've got a big T and a little t that go in this first. And this one's got a big T and a little t. And if you come down here, this one's got a big T and a little t. And this one's got a big T and a little t. So what can we tell about the offspring of this plant? What's the probability it's going to be tall, and what is the probability it's going to be short? Yep, it's going to be 100% tall. And the reason for that is that big T, or big T, little t would produce a tall plant, right? And all of those have a big T in them, so they're going to produce a tall plant. So there's 0% chance it would be short. Now, this is not a perfect science, but for what y'all need to know, this will work. This is how it's done. There are other factors that figure in that I don't understand. This is a very basic genetics thing, okay? And it's all y'all are going to be expected to be able to do. And probably you're not even going to have to go quite this far. You're probably going to be just given more something like this right here. and asked what the probability is. Like you're probably not even going to have to fill it out on your own. But I'm going to get y'all to do one more. I'm going to get y'all to do number 3 on your own. I'm going to give y'all just a few minutes to think about it, to get as far into it as you can. If you can't totally get it done, we're still going to talk about it, okay? But I'm going to just be quiet for 3 or 4 minutes and let y'all think about this one and see what you come up with. I'm going ahead and just starting to type the things I did. So Brandon, if you're still working, keep working for a couple of minutes. So kind of just be looking at what you did and so far if we have the same information, okay? Okay, so here's what I got. I used E, like I said, doesn't matter what y'all used, you'll still get the same answer. I made big E free earlobes, little e attached earlobes. It said they were both heterozygous. Remember, heterozygous means they're different. Big E, little e, big E. The reason it says heterozygous free is because big E, little e would produce free earlobes, okay? So big E, little e, big E, little e. I made my Punnett square with that. I did my cross sections. I got 75% had free earlobes because if it's big E or big E, little e, they're going to have the free earlobes. So there's 3 sections, 25% each, 75. And then I did 25% is going to have attached because that's the little e, little e. Is that what y'all got? How did y'all do on that one? Yay, okay. So that is all I'm gonna go ahead and stop this video. So anyone who is listening to this at home, if you want more work with that, you can let me know and I can send more worksheets to you.